Good evening. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and this is In Time. We are watching with the rest of the world today as we try to understand what's going on. We know there are protests in every state in the Union. We know there are protests in all of the big cities at this point. The president has responded in typical fashion, which is to bloviate and threaten. And then every now and then it appears he's got some idea of what the law is, or somebody's explained it to him, and he kind of pulls back. But it's amazing to watch. I've been around. Don't grow old. I'm not old, but I'm getting there. And I remember being a kid, and I loathe stories of the good old days because the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, and somehow people always lament the good old days, the 50s and 60s when women couldn't vote, or uh, there's may have been the good old days for some people, but uh, you know, not for a lot. And nonetheless, the United States, there's an old saying, everybody hates a winner, and the United States had been one of the most successful countries in recent history, and has been often decried and made fun of, poked fun of by every other country in the world, but was also uh, envied a lot. And we were envied because of the very things that spoiled us, which you know, massive amounts of consumer goods, the ability to have immense amounts of free time, and to be blissfully ignorant and unaware of what goes on in the rest of the world. And that was never a good idea, but it was sustainable so long as we elected leaders who did know what was going on and who could, on some level, maintain our place in this world. That includes our place with the EU, our place with the with NATO, with the United Nations, with the World Health Organization, who could keep other countries in some semblance of check. This included Russia, China, North Korea, varying degrees of success, but every president, from the Republicans to Democrats, have been able to navigate it reasonably well. Ronald Reagan did far better than most people gave him credit for, and he probably was responsible for the bringing down of the Soviet Union. He outspent them to death. This is the first time that I can really think of in recent history we've had a president who is completely unaware of U.S. law, even U.S. culture, really. Um, our place in the world, and how dependent so much of the world has become on us. And if nothing else, by us withdrawing from the rest of the world, by us creating a space where countries like China can expand and expand their soft power and start to make other people reliant on them, thereby making China far stronger than they've been thus far. Um, the other thing he's done is shown the rest of the world that perhaps they're not as reliant on us as they had thought. Chancellor Merkel of Germany had said, I think it was about 2 years ago, she lamented that she realized we are on our own, can no longer expect help from the U.S. And this isn't the kind of, you know, we weren't, well, maybe in some cases we were passing out free meal tickets, but it was to our benefit. It added soft power, it added stability, it added to the ability to trade, it allowed us to reap a number of benefits. Some we shouldn't have. We've over leveraged our power. But all these things aside, and I apologize for waxing on probably a bit too long than I should have, I'll say this. This president is essentially trying to declare martial law in the US, and the rest of the world is in such shock that we have protests in sympathy happening in at this point, every major country in the world. Tehran is now having protests. Syria is now having protests in support of the citizens of this country. Not the government, but the citizens of this country. The alt-right is coming out and making threats saying that if the protests don't stop, which they feel have to be on the far left because it can't possibly be any legitimate complaints, if they don't stop, they will engage ostensibly on the side of the government, which is interesting. They've said that this is what their Second Amendment rights are for, a fact that Donald Trump conveniently reminded them of, ironically, in his speech yesterday, very briefly, reminding people that they have a Second Amendment right and that he would stand by it. That I found very interesting because there's only one reason to stand by the Second Amendment right in this case, and that's if you hope that those rights are exercised not in defense of liberty against the tyranny of government, but in defense of the tyranny of government against those who are protesting. And I use the word protest, and I'm very careful when I say protest and riot. We've had a number of peaceful protests that have been broken up by rubber bullets, by gas attacks. And recently, the bishop at the church that Trump attended yesterday, he went to a church right after his speech. He held up a Bible. It was reported, and the bishop there confirmed, that she had been passing out water, food to protesters who needed a break. It was hot. They were, she was trying to offer aid, was trying to do what she felt her Christian duty was. The police came and said that the president was coming and they needed to clear the area, and they cleared it with tear gas. Half of them weren't even protesters. They were recovering. She helped them escape. Trump showed up to a completely cleared church, held up his Bible, didn't read any passages, didn't quote Jesus, didn't talk about the need for unity, just talked about dominating those who oppose him. And then he left. That bishop was on NPR this morning denouncing the president, denouncing his actions in front of that church. Mr. Trump, meanwhile, has taken some offense to her characterization of it, which has been recorded. There's multiple news agencies recording who recorded it. Nonetheless, Tim Murtaugh of the Trump campaign, the communications director, came out just a short while ago and said, quote, "It is sad that a lie can get, it is said." I'm curious if he knows who said it. Nonetheless, it is said that a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth can get its pants on. Oh, Jesus. This is why I knew roughly what the statement read, but I should have read it before. That's not the quote. That's not the quote. Dear Lord. It is said that, okay, this is Latin sic, thus as, I'm just going to quote what he said. I am in no way endorsing any of this statement. Oh, dear Lord. Quote, "It is said that a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth can get its pants on." This tear gas lie is proof of that. For nearly an entire day, the whole of the press corps frantically reported the, quote, news of a tear gas attack on, quote, peaceful protesters in Lafayette Park, with no evidence to support such claims. We now know through the U.S. Park Police that neither they nor any other law enforcement partners used tear gas to quell rising violence. We also know that police discovered stashes of weapons like glass bottles, bats, and metal poles hidden nearby, which are indeed strange items to have on hand for a, quote, peaceful protest. Every news organization which has reported the tear gas lie should immediately correct or retract this erroneous reporting. Now, this is how one lies. This is acute. He hasn't actually said that it was wrong. What he said is there was no evidence to support it. And, quote, we now know that police discovered. We know through the park police. Well, I don't know. Maybe it was the Secret Service. It could have been anybody, or maybe, but this seems crafted to me to be duplicitous. Nonetheless, we have the footage. We know what happened. There were many people there. But what this is a part of is what appears to be is essentially a media, an order to the media to, quote, correct or retract reporting that they don't approve of. What you're looking at, by the way, is now even more photos of bricks being found in places. And what you're about to see is what appears to be police officers unloading bricks from a van. They are not loading them. They are unloading these bricks. We cannot confirm that these are police officers. It certainly looks that way. We'll see. We'll also try to get in the audio footage of, well, that was another incident. At any rate, Trump has always had a relationship with the media where he threatens any media that he doesn't like. He threatens to, quote, open up the libel laws. He threatens to attack the media. He's threatened to punch members of the media. He has revoked the credentials of those who ask him difficult questions. Usually these are reporters that he calls dumb or disingenuous for asking honest and fair questions. This is the kind of assault on the media that I think you can expect, especially at a time like this. These are the things that concern me the most. I enjoy this footage here, but nonetheless, I'm bothered by the riots, the violence, and what is now irrefutably preemptive assaults against peaceful protesters. But what bothers me just slightly more than that is the assault on the truth, labeling everything that says something he doesn't like as fake news, saying that hydroxychloroquine kills people who take it, especially if they have COVID, is apparently fake news, despite the fact we know it for a fact. We knew it before he went out and endorsed it. We covered this, in time covered this before he even came out and said it was a good idea. This was not a secret. Nobody's been keeping this a secret. It's just he can't read. His gut tells him more than... What we have right now is in New York on the Manhattan Bridge. Protesters have been essentially kettled between two groups of police officers in what appears to be some kind of standoff. The protesters were crossing over the Manhattan Bridge from Brooklyn into Manhattan, and they met a wall of... Oh, Batman has made an appearance. The protesters were crossing over into Manhattan. They were met with a wall of police. There was no hostility, no violence. They just waited. They were told they couldn't get in because of the curfew. They waited. And then a row of police came in behind them. They are now stuck on the bridge. They cannot go forward. They cannot go back. And they are stuck there. I don't know what the intention is. I don't know what they're planning on doing. But at present, that's where they are. Right now, the protests in Los Angeles appear to be peaceful. However, there are... we do have, and we will be showing footage of military deploying in Los Angeles. We know for a fact they are military. They are wearing military uniforms. They're carrying military-issue weapons, and they are in military vehicles. These are not... Landon pointed out correctly yesterday, you have to be a little careful, make sure that you're not talking about officers who have... This is military, and a large number of military vehicles that have deployed there. Donald Trump appears now to be somewhat aware of the fact that he's not supposed to deploy troops without being asked by the governor. He cannot ostensibly cannot enact the Insurrection Act without the governor of a state asking him to do so. He is now taunting Governor Cuomo, saying chaos, lawlessness, and destruction will take over New York. When will Governor Cuomo call on the federal government for help? Well, I don't think he cares about New York one whit. I think he wants to show up and crack heads. It's odd that Republicans who sit there and talk about states' rights and let the states run their show however they want is sitting here. This is, well, I think this video is self-evident. I apologize. I should stop commenting on the video quite so much. He wants to wield and exercise his power at every opportunity. He seems to be interested in showing people just how much of a strong man he is. He has, in the past, professed admiration for people like Vladimir Putin and for even Kim Jong-un and for the president of China, who has essentially made himself now a permanent, lifelong president. He is an authoritarian, and Trump admired how he keeps his people under control. Well, it's done by killing the people who get out of line. That's how it's done. And he seems to appreciate that. There's an investigation now into the helicopters, which you're also going to see in a little bit, that was being used, deployed yesterday, a minimum of 6 Apache helicopters that were spotted making low-level passes over crowds in an attempt to disperse them. And actually, I guess it was a Huey 72's yeah, oh, well, okay, I don't know. All right, we don't know. It had previously been reported to be Apaches. That doesn't look like an Apache anyway. This looks like it's a UH-72. At any rate, a number of helicopters that were deployed yesterday, and now reports that inside the Pentagon there are people who are growing increasingly uneasy with what appears to be his intention to deploy troops actively against American citizens. We have a number of, we do have protesters at the mayor's residence in Los Angeles. Protesters, the numbers have gone down. Earlier today in Washington, we had what appeared to be double the number of protesters from yesterday that were approaching the White House. We'll check in on the status of that and see where they are. But again, we also seem to have, and we're going to show some more footage of this, a continuing pattern of attacking people who are reporting on the news. Landon Knoll discussed this with us yesterday a bit and gave us some insight, and he had suggested that one reason why is because they are seen actually as worse than the protesters, because they give the protesters encouragement and they show people how the protesters are being successful and where they are, allowing more people to protest and join. So, and we have, yeah, there was some question yesterday as to whether or not it is possible for him to do it without the consent of the governors. And one of the things that Landon Knoll suggested was that there is an interpretation whereby it could be, and he may just do it and hope that the courts, back him on it, or just wait until after the courts have. I don't know. My hope is he stays in check. It sounds like. He's dying to do it. We all know he's dying to do it. France had the protesters turn violent today. We're going to have some images of that, but this is growing, and the rhetoric does not appear to be helping. We do know now that there are ostensibly 3 autopsy reports on Mr. Floyd. The first autopsy report found that Mr. Floyd was not murdered and died as a result of intoxication from methamphetamines and I forget another substance, and along with some stress. They didn't state the cause of the stress, but said stressors and hypertension and pre-existing medical conditions. That was the preliminary report from the medical examiner. The second report found that he had died as a result of compression against his neck and chest, that this caused his heart and lungs to stop, and that he asphyxiated. The third report, and declared it homicide. The third report, which was the final report from the from the apologies, the final report from the medical examiner's office concurred with the finding of, actually, I think they were the first ones to mention the narcotics in his system. And they said that it was in fact homicide. They changed sort of the thereabouts slightly, but at least they concurred it was homicide. So at a minimum, we now do have an official report from the medical examiner's office of homicide. So I've had a few requests to look at a few extra pieces of news. Yeah, the Batman ones are cute when you see Batman walking through smoke. It's like, there's half of me that sits there and has to say, really, there's rioting. We really don't need this kind of buffoonery. And it's like, when else do we need this kind of buffoonery more? I mean, it's got to be surreal to be surrounded by smoke and tear gas and to see Batman just sauntering on through. But that's the same brevity. At one point, we had heard that a park had been rioted, and we had pictures of a giraffe going the wrong way up a one-way street, and we had pictures of a hippopotamus grazing on someone's lawn, and another hippopotamus eyeing a police car very suspiciously. And so we had these reports. We didn't quite go. We were talking about going with it. We didn't quite go because we wanted to confirm it. It turned out it was from 6 years ago. But yeah, that was a good. I think. I cannot confirm whether or not, yeah, I have roughly $420 for my wardrobe. $20 goes to the shirt, $400 goes to the coat, and underwear is secondhand. So I'm doing this without, that may be more information than you needed to know. It may be that the YouTube public does not need to know whether or not I'm wearing pants. Just saying. All right. So we're going to look at, apparently there's something, so I appreciate everyone in the live chat who has been so helpful. Yeah, has there been a C and D on, that would be a cease and desist on tear gas videos? I don't know. What I do know is that Twitter is reporting being overloaded. So many people are using Twitter at these protests, and so many people are accessing Twitter for video footage and that was New Zealand. I think that was 7 hours ago. That Twitter is now swallowing messages. If you try to send messages, sometimes they don't show. Sometimes it gets kicked back saying Twitter's at capacity. That's a first. Actually, it's not a first, but at any rate, I do know a number of accounts that have showed the tear gassing have been taken down. This is possibly because the accounts are fraudulent, but we've been able to see the video. And usually as soon as I get a link to the video, the first thing I do even before I watch it is download it. And on a couple of cases, that's enabled us to actually keep the video. But it looks legit to me. I mean, we always have to have the caveat that we haven't been able to always check it. So yeah, we have we're getting reports that the Pentagon is actually feeling themselves very much in a bind. One thing that a lot of people who don't have military experience are a little surprised by is that the military is trained not to break the law, and they are, yes, required to follow the orders of their commanders and the commander-in-chief, but if they are ordered to violate the Geneva Conventions, for example, they cannot do that, and they are held responsible if they do, regardless of whether or not they were ordered to. This is one reason why a number of things that happened at, say, Abu Ghraib and a few other places were made even more difficult. But nonetheless, the Pentagon has no real interest, I think, in cracking skulls and less in cracking American skulls. It's been my experience that the people who most enjoy the use of power are the ones who have never had to be on the end of actually employing that power, say because they had bone spurs. I am mildly bitter. I apologize. We do have a number of reports, too, of police officers with their badges that have been blacked out. You're going to see some footage of that coming up. And One interesting audio, I think we will try to get this to play, of over a CB radio, somebody suggesting that the police officers beat the living shit out of protesters who were in the way, hadn't done anything wrong. It is unclear at this time who was on that. It is possible to get onto and broadcast on police radio frequencies, so that could have been somebody screwing around. Anonymous 2 days ago was successful in overriding, playing like anti-cop rap music over cop CB radios. They have now had to encrypt their communications, which there is some legal issues regarding. But official resigns from Pentagon Advisory Board over. Yeah, well, and we've also had now calls for resignations. There is now, it's not the ACLU, I forget who, it's not the Justice Department. Somebody in the live chat hopefully can let me know which one this is. There is a and Mr. Thompson, and I think that's a good point. Mr. Thompson makes a good point. It's idealistic to assume that they don't break the rules or break laws, and that happens all the time. And we all break laws. I mean, there's even jaywalking, not to minimize it, but jaywalking is, everybody breaks the law, and everybody has laws which they think are flexible or breakable. And the police do, and so do the military. And the question is, at what point? But it is true that they are barred from doing so. And so the question is, at what point can you get them in trouble for one versus the other? If you have a direct order from your commander in chief, which is absolutely a violation of the Geneva Conventions and U.S. law, what do you do? I do not envy the people in that position, because your two highest priorities are now in conflict. My hope is we don't get there. And truth be told, right now there is the standoff. There is some military deployments, and Trump has said that today in D.C. he would make an example of the protesters. He said that he would come down on them far harder than he did yesterday. He has requested from at least 2 states, and I think Pennsylvania was the most recent one, where Pennsylvania has said they did not send him any National Guard. It is unclear as to whether or not he requested it. He has said he did not request it from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has not confirmed or denied. They just suspiciously said we didn't send him any. It looks like D.C. is requesting more National Guard. They're not getting it, so the question is, are they going to go to military? Are they going to start to use the military or not? Right now, there is definitely, or there are some violent protests, but honestly, it isn't as difficult as it was yesterday, at least that I can see. I'm going to keep an eye on it, but unless we have something unique breaking in the next, say, 45 minutes or so, we may call it a little short. I do want to get this police scanner. Yeah, I'm going to get the, and we did have that footage, and that seems to have been, that is no longer accessible. So let me try. It's coming in, okay. What we have is NYPD over an NYPD radio. And we know there are police officers speaking. There are other people speaking, and we don't know if they are police officers. We will play this, but we want to make it clear we do not know who is speaking. It is possible they are police officers. It is possible they are people who have intercepted the radio and are broadcasting on it. It is clearly somebody who is broadcasting on the radio. But we don't know whether it is a police officer or some kind of pirate signal. So let's, we're going to play this. I believe we should have no difficulty piping this in. All right, I'm going to play for you now. This was broadcast by TMZ. This has been confirmed. This was picked up by multiple scanners of the police department of the city of New York, their radio system. It's been confirmed. It is legit. It is from the New York police broadcast. I was bandwidth. Oh God, excuse me, a little tired. It is so we've confirmed it, and they do know a number of the officers who spoke. They do not know, or at least nobody's identified who the other voices are. We will play this for you now.
So we have a group of people blocking traffic on Albany and Dean Street. They're refusing to let the orange go eastbound on Dean Street and Albany. So we're stuck here. Run them over. Shoot those motherfuckers. Don't put that over yet.
All right, on my third or fourth hearing of that now, it does not sound legit to me. Those do not sound like officers. That one, run them over, shoot the motherfuckers. That strikes. I'm sorry. That strikes me as somebody having hacked into it. But what I do find interesting is the reply isn't, "Hey, who is this? Why are you on a radio?" The reply is, "Don't put that over the air." That seems to be the reply. Now, is this? Well, TMZ, I will admit, is not the greatest news source on the planet. And this came out from TMZ. I have those are spliced together ones. So that are okay. So are those? All right. It certainly does not sound to me that those men there were legit police officers. So whatever the source is, I will say this: I don't think those are police officers at the end. So, and we have this that was already posted. I will take a look at it. But as I've said, and we spoke yesterday about the planting of evidence, we also it definitely appears there's a lot of reasons at this point that we've discussed why people might plant evidence against, or let me rephrase that, why you might find weapons, bricks, and other things in the vicinity of the protest. There are a great many reasons you may not find weapons near a protest site. One reason is because the protesters intend to use them. Another reason is because somebody who isn't the protesters intend to have them use them. It's to instigate violence and start violence where there isn't. We've seen examples of that, and we discussed some examples of that being done as far back as the 60s with Landon Knoll last night. Another reason is to frame the protesters. So there's any number of, and I will not deny it is entirely possible that they were put there by protesters intending to use them. It's possible that it was, we don't know, but what we know there are some credible claims of these being planted against protesters, and we know some protesters have been using weapons, so they must have brought them. Mr. Nate Brody did earlier today do a broadcast where he covered two lawyers who had made Molotov cocktails and were interested in deploying them, and these are people who passed the bar. So they've spent ostensibly 2 years of their lives getting an education and have thrown it away to throw. I don't know if anyone knows this, but it's been researched. It's a well-known fact. There are only 3 lawyer jokes in all of human history. 3. All the rest are true stories. At any rate, we do have, and what I will. What we'll do is we have a news channel for news sharing, although I do need to say, so we're just putting, right now what we're doing is just putting in new news, anything that people have, footage that, preferably from reliable news sources, but we're looking at footage from basically anywhere. If you want to see what we've been seeing and what we've been working on, you can see it in the news sharing channel, but we also are discussing in our lounge what's been going on tonight and what's been going on for the last 7 or 8 nights, now no longer just in the U.S., but across the world. What you're going to see here is this is a well-reported incident of a truck, and this man has now been released without charges. He was going approximately 60 miles per hour. Going into the crowd there, he stops when one person fell trying to get out of the way and was right in the middle of it. I don't know if he actually hit the person or not, but at this point, they go and they drag the man out and beat the man. The police arrived, and he was taken to the hospital with minor injuries. He was charged, but he has since been released, and the conclusion is that he was scared, panicked, and which is why they have Murder 3. But I don't know. A lot going on. One of the other things that we saw yesterday, we had footage of a shopkeeper and several protesters who were defending a shop from looters. The police showed up, and there was a miscommunication between the police and the journalists who were watching, and the journalist said, those people there are representing the shopkeeper and defending the shop. Those people there are looters, and the police arrested the wrong one. And as the press kept saying, you're doing this wrong, you got the wrong guys. They're like, no, we got it under control. We know what we're doing. And finally, shortly after the chaos sort of abated, they figured out that they had the wrong people and started to go after the right people, but by then it was too late. This is a very chaotic situation. This is also why how and what you say matters. De-escalating is probably far more important than escalating at this point. Saying that the U.S. is coming in with military with, quote, heavy weapons is probably not a good idea. Again, the bishop of the church that I visited yesterday, holding a Bible in hand, has denounced him this morning on NPR, saying that in order for him to make that particular appearance, they disbanded a group of protesters who, many of whom were actually seeking shelter in that area. They were no longer actively protesting, and none of them were violent. They were dispersed with tear gas so that the president could make a photo op in front of a church that had been burned out across from the White House. So, okay, so that's what I was looking. Okay, James Miller, official from the Pentagon, has resigned over the clearing of protesters. So that particular issue, and we'll bring the photo up. So it was the church, I believe it's opposite the White House, that had been burned out. I think it was 2 nights ago. That was the night that the protesters got to the White House and got to the front gate, and we believe they did some fire damage to the gatehouse. Nonetheless, in order to get there, he had to clear the way and clear them of protesters. So they deployed tear gas and riot police. It looks like James Miller, the member of the Pentagon's Defense Science Board, has resigned. This would be now. There's at least one chief of police. I forget the region. We'll try to find that. Actually, we have that up on. Okay, I'll get that. One chief of police who's resigned. One other, I think the chief of police now in Minneapolis has been suspended. His deputy has taken over. 4 officers have been fired as a result of an incident where officers were going in. We showed that footage. I don't think we have that in tonight's because that was from yesterday. Police officers were going to parked cars, or not parked, sorry, stopped on the freeway, breaking the windows and pulling people out. These were cars that were just going straight through. Okay, that was a shot of the military in Los Angeles. That was 5 Humvees, military Humvees, desert camo, going through Los Angeles. That was probably 6 hours ago. We have all 4 of the original Floyd officers have been fired. 2 officers were fired and 2 more suspended when an officer pulled a man who was wanted on a warrant out of the car, had him with his hands behind his back, was reading him his rights. Another officer went got some distance, about 10 feet, and then ran, jumped as high and far as he could, and kicked the man in the back with a flying kick. The man bounced off his car, rebounded, and the other officer appears to have thought that this was an attempt to escape, or so. I don't know. Maybe didn't see the kick. Nonetheless, they both engaged the man, threw him to the ground. A scuffle ensued. Those two officers have both been fired. Two more that were caught on video there have been suspended. Two officers who tased a student, a college student, have been fired. So we're seeing an interesting amount of clearing house right now. So we also have, now this is, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put the volume onto this so you guys can hear this a little bit, and I'm going to let this go for a bit. Some of this there's actually no audio for, and some of it there is. I'm going to listen to some footage that we have here. I want to see what it is and understand this a little bit better before we air this. But nonetheless, like I said, so far internationally, most of the protests have been peaceful, and it looks like the governments of these countries have been very supportive of their people protesting. With this is Italy here, more of Italy. You're going to see well over a dozen countries now. And again, now it's Syria. Syria has joined the list of that is a footage of Toronto. I believe that was earlier today. So I'm going to turn on the volume for this, and then I'm going to listen to some video for a minute, and I will be back briefly.
You're outside.
They are just now outside the new American embassy here in Nine Elms. Police line is there. As I say, all very peaceful, but I'm also hearing actually that there's quite a...
All right, what we have here is footage of the tear gas deployment that, according to Trump's campaign communications director, did not happen. I repeat, this did not happen, according to the communications director from the Trump campaign. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to put this in, this is going to be made in the full bottom right corner. So I think this is worth, well, Yeah, we're gonna full screen this, I think. So what you're gonna see here is a full screen rendition. This was a Australian news team that was covering the riots, and they were there discussing what had happened earlier that day when Trump decided shortly after his declaration that he would eliminate all the protests and dominate the protesters, and had asked the states to dominate the protesters. They were sitting here peacefully in front of a church that had been burnt out right across from, I think, I want to say St. Paul's, directly across from the White House. Trump finished at the White House, decided he wanted to walk to St. Paul's for a photo op, but in order to do that, of course, they have to clear the the area. They cleared it with tear gas and rubber bullets, despite the fact it was a peaceful protest and that they had every right to be there. But that's what you're about to see. Again, this is an Australian news team.
You're outside the White House where Donald Trump is about to speak. It's getting a bit tense.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. We've just had to run about a block of police. We've been fired at with rubber bullets. My cameraman has been hit. We've also seen tear gas being used. If I go there moving through again, this is exactly what it looks like. Exactly what it looks like.
Whoa! Oh.
Amelia, can you hear us?
Amelia, you okay? Or your cameraman? Hello, Amelia. The police just charged Amelia and our 7 News cameraman there, and it looks like a policeman just punched our cameraman.
Which is interesting because they're not discriminating between protesters and the media here. Amelia, can you hear us yet?
Amelia, are you there?
Are you okay? Yes, I am. That we were media, but they don't care. They're being indiscriminate at the moment. They chased us down that street, and as you see, they're firing these rubber bullets at everyone. There is tear gas now. We are really surrounded by police. We really saw the way that they dealt with my cameraman. They're quite violent, and they don't care who they're targeting at the moment.
You're outside the White House where Donald...
All right, what you see there is moments before actually he started his speech. His speech was only about 6 minutes long. After his speech, he wanted to go to the church that was right across from the White House. The church had been burned, I think, the night before, and he wanted a photo op in front of it. The only way to do that would be to clear all the protesters. What you see is, despite being peaceful protesters, men with riot shields running in. You see someone go up and just punch the camera. They had identified themselves as press. I have met a few protesters, been in a few protests. I've personally never carried a professional broadcast camera. Most protesters, I think, don't. It was pretty clear that they were press. They were Australian press, no less, and it was clear that the officers did not discriminate. You could hear in her voice she was obviously shaken. This reflects the instances that we've been seeing in cities across the United States, where it appears that in some cases journalists are actively being targeted. One instance we covered earlier, a police officer with a kind of a fully automatic pepper gun turned and aimed at a reporter in the middle of a live broadcast, fired upon her cameraman. In that instance, it does look to me as if he had broken off from the main crowd. The crowd was going to the right. The police officers were all facing the protesters. He went off to the left, where there was a camera crew. The police officers had got interceded in between the rioters, so the camera crew were looking. They were standing a bit on the sidewalk, but I was kind of out under the street. They were looking at protesters about 100 yards away. At about 50 yards, in comes a procession of police officers preparing to engage the protesters. One police officer breaks off to the left and engages the clearly the press. But we've also seen, if that was an accident, that's fine. We have seen other instances that could not have been accidents. Multiple officers opening fire with rubber bullets and paint cans on reporters from now every major news organization. CNN, for some reason, they've got it out for CNN. Aside from the destruction of the lobby of the CNN building on the second night, they the arresting of one CNN news team for standing where they had been told to stand, and then the attack by smoke of one CNN. In fact, I'd like to find that one. I think we haven't aired that one. That's the only one that I keep talking about that we haven't aired. We do have it, but I haven't aired it, where he's standing in the middle of the street. He's reporting. The street is clear on all sides. There's a bunch of police on one side, and all of a sudden, poof, blue smoke, poof, red smoke, poof, more smoke all around him. Just starts getting deployed, and he's just like, what do I do? It's not an accident. Michael Westby, $20. The support from outside this country is overwhelming. I'm floored by it. It's interesting. Like I said, I think there's always been this awkward relationship between the U.S. and the rest of the world. They both resent us operating as the police of the world and appreciate it. I think now they're learning, A, they don't really need it. They can do okay on their own without us, and B, there isn't as much to look up to as they once thought there was, but they still very much feel a kinship, I think, with the average American citizen, and certainly with people in this country who are not being allowed to live up to the ideals of this country. And it is amazing to watch people in every major country now, I think, in the world, have a greater understanding of the pain and suffering of minorities in this country than our president does. Thank you, Michael Westby, for that super chat. We appreciate it sincerely. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So I think we're going to air that footage one more time. That's some really shocking footage, but I think we've seen it. We've gone over it. I think it is worth covering one more time. I mean, we'll also, I think, try to get some more. James Hogue, thank you very much for coming by. Yeah, it's getting late for us, and I think it depends on what happens over the next half hour, 45 minutes, as to whether or not we continue. Let's see. CNN Business is reporting that Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has called for an investigation after two of the country's journalists were attacked by Washington police in D.C. Monday. Yeah, that's an accurate characterization, I think, of what I see in that footage. I'll take a moment, too, to thank, Tony Designs, Bregwin, Feline, just all of the mods. Also, Ryrez, the people who've been here at every broadcast for the last 7 days as we cover this insanity. Atheist Swede, who's a supporter of the show and has been here, and we appreciate it. There's some of you I've seen every night here giving us support. Thank you. It means a lot. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to our volunteers, our mods, to everybody who works on every aspect of this show. So, yeah, I'll get on that if I can. So thank you all. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bring back the clip of for now. I'm gonna take one more moment to take a look at what we're looking at. I am interested to know what's happening on the Manhattan Bridge. I wouldn't want to be on that bridge right now. They are trapped by protesters. Yes, I know. I finally had to. Okay, so there's a long and difficult history between myself and many of the people on In Time. Some of it contractually I can't speak about. Some of it is just too terrible. I'm still recovering from the trauma from some of the people, especially it all seems to orbit around one mod who has fantastic powers to destroy channels with his mind. And we've cleverly kind of pretended like we're friends with him. Courtney's scared of him. I'm not. I'm not. He doesn't intimidate me at all. No, I'm not scared of him. But Courtney's terrified. So just for Courtney, we humor him. But yeah, I finally had to start saying his name. But so we're going to get back to, I'm going to play this. I think the audio, we're going to make sure that the audio is on this. Actually, the audio should kick in a second on this one. I'm going to take a minute. I want to double check on a couple of things that we're keeping an eye on live right here. Again, thank you very much for that very generous super chat, Mr. Westby. And we are going to take a look at what we've got. Meanwhile, if you're here, like and subscribe. It really does help us. It helps with the algorithm. And if you like the show, remember, we've got the break business. We've got a lot of other content. We had Dr. Richard Carrier just a few hours ago. That's one reason we were a little late. Just a few hours ago, we had Dr. Richard Carrier on describing the history of Christianity and science. So covering the end of the world is not the only thing. So
They are just now outside the new American embassy here in 9 Elms. Police line is there. As I say, all very peaceful, but I'm also hearing actually that there's quite a number of protesters just behind this this first group here. There's the other group are still crossing the Thames and making their way to the embassy, and it does appear that this is where they have intended to continue the demonstration. All massing there now, several hundreds, no social distancing, as I say. London still under lockdown for events like this, but the police just keeping a line there in front of the embassy. This embassy, huge embassy built on the South Bank with a moat around it, and one of the most high-tech, security conscious embassy.
All right, we are going to be playing that footage again, but before we do, I want to give a brief rundown for those of you who have been living under a rock for the last 7 or 8 days. I think it was eight days ago. Mr. Floyd was a black man who was clearly inebriated by some kind of substance and had purportedly been trying to pass fake bills as he purchased something from a convenience store. was pulled out of his car. He was sitting in front of the car, pulled out of his car by 4 police officers. He was asked to stand up against the wall of the convenience store, which he did. He was clearly sluggish but responsive and capable of understanding, and seemed interested in. This is Syria, by the way, that you're seeing here. This is Syria 8 hours ago. That's no help to me whatsoever, but thank you. So if somebody can read Farsi, you can let me know what that is. So Floyd was... What happened next is a little unclear. There are some reports that he was put in the squad car and then beaten while in the squad car. That's been unconfirmed. I've seen footage that we can't confirm whether or not that's what that is. But we do know that at some point he was thrown to the ground and pinned between the wheel of the car and 3 officers. 2 officers were pressing, holding him down, pressing on his back and legs. 1 officer had his knee into Mr. Floyd's neck, and as we currently understand it, 8 minutes later, Floyd became unresponsive. He'd been complaining that he couldn't breathe, complaining that he was in pain. There were people there watching who insisted that the police ease up. They refused. He became unresponsive after 8 minutes. The reports are currently that we understand, the only ones that are confirmed that we so far know, is that it appears they waited another 11 minutes before letting him go. He was taken to a hospital. There he was pronounced dead. That night there were protests in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The next night there were protests in 4 cities. The next night there were protests in 20 cities, then 30 cities. Now 40 cities in the United States are under curfew. There are protests in now some 120 to 150 cities across the United States. There are protests in, I don't even have an accurate count. Last night it was 12. I have to guess now it's at least 15 if you've added Syria and a few other cities. Protests in a number of other cities: Ireland, Spain, France, Germany, the UK, Canada, Syria. All are having protests in sympathy with the American protesters and with the Black Lives Matter movement. Donald Trump, in a meeting with the governors of numerous states, we don't know all the people there, but he introduced the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and said that this man would now be, quote, in charge. This ominous warning also comes with a reference to the Insurrection Act, which is a 213-year-old act which enables the president to deploy the military locally in the United States as law enforcement officials, if requested ostensibly by the governors of individual states, and in violation of what is the Posse Comitatus Act. Posse Comitatus is the common name for an act that makes it illegal to deploy the United States Navy and Army in the U.S. for local operations against U.S. citizens, whether it's law enforcement or any other kind of activity. So the only way around Posse Comitatus would be the Insurrection Act, which the president has repeatedly mentioned. At that meeting, the president told the governors that they needed to dominate their citizens. We have the meeting. We have it. It's both on our Discord, if you want to join us there. It is also in yesterday's show, along with the presidential speech afterwards. He said that the governors needed to dominate their states, dominate their citizens, and if they didn't, any violence and any, this is from Los Angeles here. That's pretty, yeah. If they didn't, it would be a sign of weakness and all the injuries and damage would be on them. He then said we would see something that had never been seen before in D.C. that night. The good news is he was right. the bad news is he was right. The good news is it wasn't as bad as it could have been. A number of helicopters, at least 6 helicopters, were deployed over D.C. last night. The military is investigating as to, and I think you're going to see that next. There's a helicopter over D.C. You're going to see more. These are military helicopters in violation of FAA guidelines for maintaining at least 1,000 feet over a city, and also apparently in violation of the failure to actually to properly activate the the Insurrection Act, which requires that the president warn the U.S. citizens that he's about to deploy the police against, that they are in violation of the law, and give them one final opportunity to withdraw. He hasn't given them that, so as of yet, ostensibly, he cannot have activated that act. These are what appear to be police officers planting bricks. For what reason, nobody knows, and we cannot confirm that they are police. It just appears that way. So, the riots, in a number of cities, these protests have become violent. In some cases, it is crystal clear that the protesters have started the violence, but in a majority of cases, it appears as if the police are breaking up and this is actually a car. You're about to see a police car actually ride into the, and there goes another police car. So 2 police cars now actively going into the protesters. We have numerous reports from several states of police cars going into protesters. We have reports of, we do have one report of a protester getting into a vehicle and ramming police. We have, we were able to confirm that the footage that we showed of a 8 or 9-year-old black girl getting maced in the face, she was being held by her mother. She and her mother were outward facing. Her mother had her arms wrapped around the little girl. A police officer came up, maced her right in the eyes, and then walked away. That officer has, I believe, been identified, but it was indeed a police officer that was unprovoked. So, getting a little crazy. The President of the United States then went out in front of the White House and said that he would end the protests that night. That was last night, and while indeed he did escalate his attempt to stop the protests, as of yet they continue, and as of 6 hours ago in D.C., the protest outside the White House was double what it had been the night before. In order to, shortly after that, he decided he wanted to go to do a photo op at a church. I believe it was St. Paul's Church, right opposite the White House. He wanted to go to St. Paul's Church, which had been burned. The fire had been put out, but the church was badly damaged. A bishop in that church was giving shelter and food and water to protesters and people who were looking to catch a break from it. It is just outside the White House, but at the moment, what we're understanding was they were not engaged in active protests. There was a police presence showed up and then dispersed the crowd, dispersed it extremely, well, it dispersed it violently in an attempt to clear it so that Donald Trump could have a photo opportunity where he held up the Bible in front of that church. So what we're going to do now is we are going to switch the video over to what happened there just as Trump was giving his speech in order to clear the way so that he could show up there later and have a clear area to stand with a Bible in front of St. Paul's. Actually, St. Paul's is the cathedral. Well, let me do this.
You're outside the White House where Donald Trump is about to speak. It's getting a bit tense.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. We've just had to run about a block as police moved in. We've been fired at with rubber bullets. My cameraman has been hit. We've also seen tear gas being used. Here we go. They're moving through again. This is exactly what it looks like. Exactly what it looks like. We're just staying safely.
Oh.
Whoa. Oh.
Amelia, can you hear us?
Amelia, are you okay? Or your cameraman? Hello, Amelia. The police just charged at Amelia and our 7 News cameraman there, and looks like a policeman just
Which is-
punched our cameraman.
Which is interesting because they're not discriminating between protesters and the media here. Amelia, can you hear us yet?
Amelia, are you there?
You heard
Are you
us
okay?
yelling then. Yes, I am. I am. You heard us yelling there that we were media, but they don't care. They are being indiscriminate at the moment. They chased us down that street, and as you see, they were firing these rubber bullets at everyone. There is tear gas, and now we are really surrounded by the police, and you really saw the way that they dealt with my cameraman Tim. They're quite violent, and they do not care who they're targeting at the moment.
You're outside the White House where Donald Trump is about to speak. It's getting a bit tense.
A bit tense, that is one way to put it. We have a report now. There's been some of the other incidents which have been difficult to wrap your head around have been the vigilantes who have gotten involved in one way or another. Some of the vigilantes apparently have been, of course, on the side of the protesters and going after the police officers. Others have been on the side of the police officers. There was a video from white nationalists released earlier today where they said all they were waiting for was for Donald Trump to give the order and they would go forward and defend this country. There was an incident a couple days ago of a man with multiple swords, samurai swords, going into a crowd and attacking people. A man with a knife going into a crowd and attacking people. He was later stabbed and killed with his own knife. There were reports we saw footage of a woman faking being in a wheelchair and stabbing people who were coming out. She was offering to help people who were coming out. Looters were coming out of a store and instead started stabbing them. She was later seen getting up and walking away. We had also footage of a man with a compound crossbow shooting at multiple protesters and shooting down the ones that were approaching him, trying to stop him. They finally overwhelmed him. So we've seen a lot of, unfortunately, some bizarre behavior. There are over 300 million Americans in this country, and there are some mentally ill ones. There are some crazy ones. Just a lot of stuff that is. It brings out the best in people, brings out the worst in people. Again, the two police officers with Molotov cocktails who were. Going to sorry, not police officers, two lawyers. So what we have now, it looks like on one end of the Manhattan Bridge, the police officers have withdrawn. So this would allow them, I have to believe it's the Brooklyn side, allowing the protesters off the bridge and onto Brooklyn. That is good news. The other thing that's been going around is Republicans for Biden. We spoke about this actually with Dr. Carrier about 4 or 5 hours ago, where there's a new movement now of Republicans who are saying that, look, it's better to have a Democrat in office than Donald Trump. And by the way, I've made the same argument on the reverse side. I am liberal. I'm for gay rights. I'm for, I'm a liberal. I'm what you'd expect a liberal to be. But I would easily, if I had to vote between Trump and Pence, I would vote for Pence. I would absolutely. And I would like to see Trump removed either through the 25th Amendment, impeachment, however it would need to be done, however, whatever legal means by which it could be done. I would like to see him, removed from office and have Pence take over. My views are much closer to Trump than Pence when it comes to just about every political issue. I'm closer to Trump. But Trump is unstable. He's unreliable. He is getting people killed. What he did with COVID and telling people to take hydroxychloroquine, telling people essentially to freebase Lysol. He's not well. He is not well. We know this. You can't say that for whatever reason in this country right now, but he is not well. He has never been well. He's never been this unwell, but he's never been well. He wasn't well in the first place. And when you see what he's been doing, and you don't hand the nuclear codes over to someone like that. You don't hand the U.S. military over to somebody who's telling people to dominate their citizens. Are you fucking out of your mind? It goes to Pence. He's at least competent. I disagree with him strongly on every view he's got on everything. He can't be alone in a room with a woman without a chaperone. That's how Christian he is. He's competent. He was a senator. He can do the job. This is what happens when you have an incompetent man running. At any rate, Republicans for Joe Biden are making a very similar argument, which is they don't like Joe Biden, but he can do the job. He's competent. You wouldn't be. I've never been more ashamed of this country. Somebody in our live chat earlier said that they were amazed at how much other countries have stepped up, and yeah, other countries have stepped up more than our own president. And when you take a look at a man who at I think it was the G8 was so eager to be in front, he's shoving other world leaders aside so that he can be at the front of the. And you can just, there's no shame in it. He doesn't even realize he's doing it. He doesn't give a fuck that these are leaders of other countries. He shoves them aside so he can be at the front of the camera op. I'm more impressed with people who can lead than people who have to be in the front of I don't care where you sit in the picture. Stand in the back. Let other people take the. My father used to say you can either do something well or you can take the credit for it. You can't do both. Let's have a president who does something well. Fuck the credit. So Republicans for Biden are basically making the argument that, hey, in 4 years they can take another shot at the apple, but right now their parties become toxic. What's happening in this country has become toxic, and we are losing our standing, and China is taking advantage of it in many ways. We'll have to do a show just on that. China is moving into the gap that we have left by abandoning our responsibilities in the rest of the world. Republicans for Biden are saying, if you're a patriot, you vote for Biden even though he's of the wrong party because at least he's qualified. Don't know if it's going to get anywhere, but that's where it is. So let's see what else is going on. We do know we've got footage, and I've seen it. I haven't been able to hear it yet, but of what appears to be a shooting in New York. I've been explained that if I could listen to the audio, what I would hear is a hail of gunfire in killing this person. And then one other report here that I'm looking at of what appears to be protesters who were kneeling, and then after they knelt, they were attacked. So I'm gonna take a look at this, and so I'm gonna put the audio up for another minute or two on this, and then we'll see what we have here. I mean, on one hand, I think it's good to see some of this footage so that we all see what's going on in our streets, because we are responsible one way or another. We are responsible for the feelings of disenfranchisement of the protesters and of the large swaths of our citizens, and we are responsible for how the police officers behave, when they behave well, when they behave poorly. We are responsible for how our government deals with this. So I think it's important to see it and to know what's going on. Having said that, got 50, 60 hours of footage like this, and after a while it does all start kind of to look the same. So let's see. We've already had a few people leave earlier, which we do appreciate it. We appreciate the people who, we appreciate that if this is getting to be a bit much, bail. We appreciate the supporters and the people who are hanging out, but this is difficult on all sorts of people. Now we do have somebody who did a translation. It was Arabic. The message was, I guess he was trash talking Al Jazeera studios in Qatar, telling people to go onto Freedom Square, which is basically a colloquial for American to do what it takes. So, all right, thank you for that. So once again, I'm going to put the audio back on. I'm going to listen to what we have in, but it's unfortunate when we've been doing this for 7 or 8 days now, and it's all the same stuff. But let's take a look and see if there's something there that we think you should take a look at. So I will be back in a moment.
Are those fucking bricks? What the fuck are those?
Those look like bricks. Look, yeah, those are fucking bricks. What the fuck? They're collecting all of those bricks so that the protesters don't fucking use them, dude. That's what they're doing. Or they're doing that for undercover police officers that are getting involved in the protests so that they have an excuse to beat the shit out of people. So.
My friend, you are just adorable.
All right, so there was a shooting in New York, it looks like at least an hour ago. It was a man, he was armed. That I can tell, the officers were not telling him to put down his gun. Obviously, should in that situation, but there were multiple officers, and there were bystanders telling him to drop the gun. Apparently he didn't, and then you can hear what sounds like as many as 30 shots being fired. I will say, so this was in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, shortly after 9 p.m. Eastern Standard. There is footage of that available, I think, on the internet if you want to see it. Also, it looks like chemical agents. This was not. I don't know what chemical agents mean. At a minimum, it's tear gas was deployed against a crowd. There was a man with an AR rifle in the crowd. He had 2 clips. They were not extended. They were not the extra large clips. I think they were regular clips. There was no evidence that he had loaded the weapon or that he was using it in any way, but he did have it, and they deployed some kind of chemical agent against the group. Again, I suspect it was just tear gas. In Portland, Oregon, now there is a protest of about 10,000 people. And in D.C., the protesters have moved away from the White House, which I think is probably a wise idea, and are now heading into the downtown D.C. area. There appear to be a large number of officers there, but right now it looks like there isn't. Right now, there isn't. There is no threats of violence or any violence anyone can see. We do know that the military has been deployed to Los Angeles and to Washington and Los Angeles. There's been at least 40 arrests as of this moment. It looks like they are trying to arrest as many people as they can. There's no word on military action, but we have a number of military personnel there, including private military and/or police services. These are men who, when asked, say they work for the Department of Justice and have not answered anything more than that. They are usually clothed in black. They have no identifying markers. Their boots do not have treads on them, so you can't. Makes it much harder to identify who's who. And you have nobody knows who these people are. Again, I chalk this up to I try to stay away from conspiracy theories, and because we there's a lot going on. So I'm thinking probably in about 5 minutes we're going to call this, unless there's something that needs to be monitored. Obviously 10,000 people in Portland, but it does look like that is now. David Thompson, Al Jazeera is shit. I have enjoyed Al Jazeera's work. I only listen to Al Jazeera English, so who knows, in other languages it may not be. They are biased, and it's interesting seeing the bias. It's an eye-opener. But that I've seen, they tend to be quite accurate with their reporting. So, but so I think what we're going to do is yeah, multiple. So we have, I mean, the number of reporters I did want to try to get for today's show, but we also had to prep for the carrier interview. So my hope is for tomorrow, depending on scheduling, we can get a montage of the assaults on reporters. We know that there are reporters who have showed their credentials, had those credentials accepted by police officers, and were nonetheless pinned to the ground and pepper sprayed. We know that there have been people with press bulletproof vests on who have been hit repeatedly by officers. We know that it's utterly insane. Then we have that footage of the Australian crew that was attacked by officers in the clearing outside of the church, right outside of the White House, right in front of the White House. There's a church there. It received fire damage. Trump wanted a press op in front of it, and rather than hear, oh, they're protesters, let's move, he ordered it cleared. By the way, according to the communications director for the Trump campaign, that didn't happen. So, and I know it didn't happen because the truth can get halfway around the world. Sorry, a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth gets its pants. Peaceful protest! Peaceful protest! I needed a piece of communication. Peaceful protest! A lie can get halfway around the world while the truth is still tying its shoes. That's the quote. Samuel Longhorn Clemens. Mark Twain. At any rate, so I'm going to take a look at this, but I think we are probably winding down. It does look like we have at least one more. All right, the DC protests are still peaceful. It looks like there's some violence, but they've been escorted away from, and it looks like they voluntarily, they appear to voluntarily be moving away from the White House, which I think is a very good idea for all involved. We do have what appears to be more National Guard shooting. It says here that they pepper sprayed a CNN crew live on air. There's been a good deal of that, and we'll see. We've had some discussions. We had some discussions yesterday as to theories as to why they may be doing that. We know Trump does not like the news media. Now, he doesn't micromanage this, so he's not sitting there calling up every police officer saying, "Hey, if you see make sure you go get the news crew." But on the flip side, culture leads from the top down, and his culture is very specific. We do know that the military often does not like the press because the press does inadvertently either reveal locations to quote the enemy, whoever that may be, does let other protesters know where the protests are, and it makes your life harder. Police in general aren't huge fans of the press. It makes their lives harder, but it's been my experience. This may not be other people's experience, but it's been my experience. They're still quite respectful of the press and do understand that in essence, actually, the police and the press are both serving the same masters, just for different means. So the DC march is now appears to be double the size of yesterday, so this was one of the things that I suggested would probably happen, which is I will be honest, I haven't been all that interested in protesting myself, especially I've got family where Donald Trump started making these kinds of threats. You know what? I'm starting to think about doing it. So I have to believe that nobody likes being threatened, and when Donald Trump wants to get into a dick measuring contest with himself and the rest of the nation, it's going to agitate me. And finally, and I think we'll end on this note, what we're seeing here, according to the Raw story, published the FBI has, quote, no intelligence Trump has said that all international countries, so that are arrested. Did I leave that video running again? I may have. My apologies. The FBI has said there's no intelligence whatsoever that Antifa was involved in Sunday's violence at D.C. This is a direct contradiction of Trump, who said that it was Antifa, it was professional anarchists. I don't know what a professional anarchist is. Somebody could please explain that to me, but that does strike me as having a couple ontological problems with it. Nonetheless, a professional anarchists is what he claimed Sunday happened, were responsible for the pushing up against the White House, the injuries to the Secret Service, and the dismantling of the temporary gates in front of the White House. There is no evidence, according to the FBI, that any of this is true. This is probably going to come out with Trump saying that he doesn't trust the FBI anymore because he doesn't trust the U.S. intelligence agencies when they disagree with what his gut tells him. But that is what we know. So, okay, is there other audio still playing? Okay, no, I think I corrected the audio issue. I do apologize. I believe the audio has been fixed. I do apologize. We're wrapping it up. The FBI has said that there's no intelligence Antifa was involved in Sunday's violence. They have not yet reached any conclusions about any of the other violence, but I suspect that's a pretty good indication that Trump has absolutely zero idea what he's talking about when he says that these were all, this just hasn't been the case. They've arrested people. The people, they get your name and address when they arrest you. Most of them are local across the country. Trump is making shit up. He's making shit up to cover his pride and cover the fact that he's botching this, and everybody knows it. At any rate, as a response to Trump's declaration that he would end the protests last night, we now have twice as many. We've doubled the number of protesters outside of the White House. Those protesters have now moved on and are heading into downtown Washington. At present, outside of a few pockets, they appear to be peaceful. The protesters that were stuck on the Manhattan Island Bridge have been allowed off and apparently are still coming off the bridge into Brooklyn. We have at least one shooting in D.C. where it appears it was literally a hail of gunfire. Just it's hard to determine, but it sounded like at least 30 shots being fired. Yeah, I do think I think from now on we're not going to do breaking news until Trump tells the truth. I think that's going to be shocking enough to see. All right. So I think that's it. I think we're probably going to call it. It's a little early compared to when we've been going to bed, but honestly, it's the same that we've been seeing for the last 7 nights now, and it's not under control, but things aren't burning to the ground either. There's sporadic violence. At least one person appears to have been killed. I can't imagine anyone surviving that level of gunfire. That was pretty. That was pretty astonishing. We have a few more police officers who have been either fired or resigned. Someone at the Pentagon, I think he was in the science committee at the Pentagon, has resigned over Trump's what appears to, in my view, to be abuse of power in clearing protesters and people who were just resting in front of the church across from the White House, clearing them with gas and rubber bullets. We showed twice, I think, the footage of an Australian news team that was there and came under fire. An officer punched the camera, and it looks like at least the cameraman was also punched, and perhaps the reporter who found herself on the ground. She appears to either have been punched or shot. I wish I could say that this was anything new. The good news is we don't have an increase, apparently, in the military deployments. The military is in LA, the military is in DC, but they have not engaged in any significant way. There doesn't seem to be the same kind of helicopter presence. In fact, there's an investigation into the use of helicopters yesterday. So I think so unless there's something, hold on. Oh, this does also bring up one other thing that somebody had mentioned earlier, and I just wanted to cover, which is we're still in the middle of a global pandemic, and we are going to see 2 weeks from now a massive spike in coronavirus infections. Oh, dear Lord. Okay. Oh, that's good. we're going to see that, and a number of states have actually lifted the coronavirus lockdowns early. They were supposed to go through stages. I forget, there were 2 states, one today, one yesterday, completely lifted the lockdown. They were supposed to go through about a month staged reopen, and they lifted them early. I think the thinking behind that was that part of this is people have been pent up too much. People have been out of work, and if you get them back to work, you're going to help do something to end these protests. Having said that, this is going to be, we're already starting to see some upticks. Now, it hasn't been 2 weeks, it's been only about a week, but we did see a few other significant social distancing snafus with the break of 3 dams in Michigan, and with the beaches opening, and the openings that did start, in fact, about 2 weeks ago. So we're starting to see an uptick, and I think in about a week from today, a little more than a week today, we're going to start to see some serious increase in numbers, and I think we're going to start to have a second spike, not a second wave, but a second spike. We saw a spike in New York. What a spike is so many cases coming in so quickly that it overwhelms the medical system, and I think we're going to be looking at that coming up. We're going to try to talk to, I mean, we've already had some people to talk about it, and it was already looking kind of unavoidable before all this, but nonetheless, I think one problem at a time. It looks like for tonight, things are okay. I will say Pat Robertson, who has repeatedly claimed that Hurricane Katrina was caused by gays in New Orleans. I'm willing to grant it to him. If the hurricane that put Texas, I forget which hurricane it was, but the hurricane that put Texas under 20 feet of water hit Texas because they voted for Trump. I'm happy with that. At any rate, Pat Robertson appears at this point to have told Trump, quote, to stop what he's doing because it's, quote, not cool. That was Pat Robertson, 90 years old, I believe founder of the 400 Club. Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining us. Like I said, I'm glad. It seems like there's going to be news dribbling in all night, but I don't think there's going to be anything huge. I think we've passed the time where if we were going to see anything big, we'd have seen it. It looks, there are a couple of states that are still having significant issues, but it looks like those are being dealt with reasonably well. So we do appreciate your coverage. If you have not yet hit the sorry, did I say 4? I may have said the 400 Club. I got 400 on the mind. Yeah, it was the 700 Club. So thank you all for joining us. Please do hit the like and subscribe. It really does help us out. And if you want to consider either becoming a Patreon to the show, you can, when we're not basically in emergency conditions, we have Patreon meetings. We chat with our Patrons and, you know, get their feedback on the show. They give us a lot of great ideas, topics that we haven't thought of yet. So it's always a lot of fun, but there's a lot of other things that we do with our patrons. So we hope you'll consider doing that and or subscribing to this channel. But in the meantime, there's a Discord. The link's been dropped a few times. You'll see it dropped again soon, I suspect. But thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your support. Thank you once again to the people who have been giving us such a steady supply of news. Thanks to our mods and to everybody who works here to make sure that we have a quality show. And I hope everyone take a break tonight. Go to sleep. It's only one. Sleep well, and I look forward to maybe us having better news tomorrow. Thank you.